So I don't think we could have had a better setting of the scene, and as you'll see, a lot of the things, themes, and so on that Alain has brought up will be coming back. I just wanted to spend a few minutes before we break for coffee talking a little bit about the feedback that we got on our consultation paper. We, after a first workshop in October 2015, we developed a kind of position paper looking at, divided up into preclinical, clinical, manufacturing, pricing, reimbursement, and access components. And you've already heard, and the discussion was great, by the way, in terms of some of these issues coming forward. And we put the consultation paper on the IMI website and asked people just to write to us and tell us what they thought. And so I'm going to feed back on a summary of what we received. Could I have the next one? Sorry, I can be in charge. So I think the paper was up for a couple of months, and we received 34 written submissions, about 120 pages of documents, so it was very nice. Submissions came from 9 European countries and 7 EU or international bodies. 8 submissions came from individuals in their personal capacity, and 26 submissions came on behalf of institutions. So there were a few general comments that I'll share, and I think most of you who have registered will have received a summary of this. So we obviously did not make reference to some existing documents that were of relevance. So we did not refer to potential links with ongoing projects and initiatives, and that's going to be something that obviously we will need to do when we choose something, make sure that we're not reinventing the wheel and we're doing something complementary or additional. The main key areas of unmet need were covered. We'll deal with identified gaps later on. The questions were relevant. Obviously, the IMI would not be able to solve all of the problems, but could be beneficial. And that's, of course, the goal of this workshop, is to try and understand what those would be. So specific comments on preclinical development. Comments on molecular imaging need to be more prominent. Choosing the right models for specific diseases. A lot of discussion around organoids and the maturity of that technology versus small or large animal models. And somebody asking the question, so who determines what a robust preclinical assessment means in some of these disease areas? Alain has already mentioned one of the major hurdles for this technology is around immunogenicity. Defining product for use in preclinical assessments are real challenges, and that has come up in our discussion around quality standards, research versus GMP batches and so on, and encouraging us to use the framework of risk-based approach, already part of the EU regulatory system. On clinical development, of course, the clinical trial designs, these are very highly case and disease dependent. Long-term monitoring of patient and socioeconomic impact, a lot of discussion around economic models, and we'll come to those later on. And some ideas around, in some of these cases, that even if you start with a very, very rare condition, sometimes you have abilities to expand in other areas. Identifying and assessing benefit-risk profiles early on. A lot of discussion and comments around hospital exemption, and I thought, lots of polarized ideas about this, but also some people saying that hospital exemption should be considered as complementing rather than competing with some of the traditional authorization pathways. And so I think that will remain a very interesting topic to discuss. The lack of funding for clinical trial design and implementation. On manufacturing, So GMP facilities in hospitals, how should we address either whether there's enough of those, there isn't, should there be centres of excellence and all of this kind of stuff? Should we invest in improving academia-based product development, lack of quality standards, robust potency assays, supply of raw materials, heterogeneity of product types, how do we deal with that? Pharmaceutical grade of raw materials, lack of pharmacopoeial monographs for some of these, requirement for networks of qualification of suppliers, and of course the idea around scale-up that was already mentioned earlier on. There were specific then comments on pricing, reimbursement and access part. Professional bodies asking us not to assume that current HTA methodologies and frameworks cannot work for ATMPs, and that we should explore what's possible within those frameworks. And obviously we need to talk a lot more and understand and I'm sure perform a lot more health economic studies in some of these issues to try and find a solution to the cost issue that Alain was alluding to before. And then an appeal, I think, for mapping of some of the existing resources, registries, compassionate use records across Europe, and looking at what exists in that framework. So then we had specific questions at the end of the document. Have the key challenges that can be addressed through collaborative public-private initiatives been properly defined? In general, yes, but, and this is the reason for this workshop again, we need to discuss more about the value proposition for a public-private partnership like IMI, IMI as the vehicle for doing what exactly. And there were a few proposals there. Which of the proposed potential initiatives should be prioritized? So a lot of people with obviously a lot of ideas, lots of support for preclinical testing and manufacturing, a lot to do with education and training in this space, and that comes back again on the in the gaps that I'll come to in a minute. But then, a lot of interest in what can we share. So can we share validated vector systems? Can we share analytical tools? And then a lot about regulatory pathways for ATMPs, manufacturing hubs, economic models, registries, and so on. And this mapping coming back and addressing the current lack of funding for clinical assessments, notably first-in-man clinical proof of concept. And then some of those come back in terms of the missing areas. Education and training came, I think, in over 50% of the submissions we had. People were saying we need to train people in this space, in this translational space, in this specific ATMP space, in order for us to understand exactly what's going on, bringing in all the stakeholders. There was one critique that we hadn't articulated enough the full breadth of product types that could be put into this ATMP box, and so we probably need to articulate that a little more clearly. Economic models comes back, and then appropriate hospital-based infrastructures to address specific clinical needs for assessment. And then a list of people that we should be linking into or discussing with in terms of people that have spoken about this, provided documents on it. The EMA has published on their website a document that you should all read in terms of this. And obviously, we're not going to do something in our own little silo. We have to be connected to what's going on. So I'd just like to thank all of those who fed back. For those of you who have received this version, for those who registered, I think that you will have a list of all of those people, individuals and associations who have fed back, and this is just obviously a summary of 120 pages of documentation. So I don't know if there are any specific questions on that or comments on that, but I think now we've kind of set the scene. And we'll probably have a coffee break and then come back to more specific thinking, and encourage you all to obviously participate actively. I'm sure you will, and really to try and, at the end of the day, what we want are some priority areas where we collectively believe that IMI could be a vehicle to do what in what area, so that we can go forward and design some interesting programs.